You look like my daddy. Ethan Whitmore stopped so sharply that Clara Bennett, his assistant, nearly bumped into him. He looked down at her, his face tightened. No, he said. No, I don't. You've got the wrong man. The girl did not run away. She studied him with a quiet seriousness. You do, she said. You look very much like him. Ethan stepped back. What do you want? Nothing. Where did you come from? His voice sharpened. You just run up to strangers in nice clothes and call them family. Clara glanced at him. Mr. Whitmore, but Ethan kept looking at the child. The little girl's hand fell from his sleeve. I didn't ask for anything. I just thought you looked like my daddy. Ethan gave a short laugh without warmth. Your daddy, he said. Do you know how many people say that to me? How many strangers suddenly decide I look like their father, their uncle, their long-lost relative right before they ask for money? I've heard it all. The child's brows pulled together. I didn't say you were my daddy. Ethan looked away, but she continued. My daddy died. I only said you look like him. That's all. For 1 second, Ethan had no answer. A woman nearby had slowed down, watching with the open curiosity of someone who had forgotten basic manners. She whispered to the man beside her, but not quietly enough. Isn't that Ethan Whitmore, the billionaire? The man asked. Yes, the real estate guy. I saw him on TV. He said he was single. A teenager lifted his phone halfway. Wait, is this his kid? No way, someone said. He's got a secret daughter. A man in a baseball cap gave a low laugh. At Disneyland. That's one way to find out. The child looked from face to face, confused. I'm not his daughter. But the murmurs grew. Rich men always have secrets. Didn't he say he had no family? One woman bent slightly toward Annie, wearing a smile that was not kind. Sweetheart, are you the billionaire's daughter? No, Annie said. I'm Annie. The teenager pointed his phone again. Say that again. Are you his kid? Clara stepped forward. Put the phone down. Do not record a child. The boy smirked. Public place. Ethan turned toward him. I said, put it down. The boy lowered it a little, but the crowd had already formed a loose circle. People pretended to be passing by while staying close enough to listen. A woman with sunglasses on her head laughed. This is why celebrities shouldn't come to theme parks. He's not a celebrity, her husband said. He's richer than one. Someone else called out. Mr. Whitmore, you got something to explain. The comment drew a few laughs. Ethan's face changed. Back off, he snapped. The laughter faded, but not fully. A man said, hey, we're just asking. She's the one who called you daddy. She did not call me daddy, Ethan said. Close enough, the man replied. That was when Ethan exploded. Do you people have nothing better to do? He shouted, his voice cutting through the bright music of the park. A little girl says one sentence and you turn it into a circus. You shove phones in her face, laugh at her, ask if she's some scandal you can post online. What is wrong with you? The circle went still. Clara stared at him startled. She had seen Ethan angry in boardrooms, but never like this. Ethan pointed toward the teenager. If I see that child's face online, my legal team will make your week miserable. The teenager dropped the phone. And the rest of you, Ethan continued, still loud. Stop standing there like vultures. She's a child. Annie flinched at his voice. Her shoulders rose toward her ears and both hands tightened around her backpack straps. Then she stepped forward. He's not my daddy. Her voice was small but clear enough for those nearest to hear. Ethan turned back toward her. Annie looked at the people around them. Her eyes, shiny but steady. He's not my daddy. I didn't say he was. My daddy died. I only said, this man looks like him. The simple truth quieted them more than Ethan's shouting had. A woman looked down, embarrassed. The man in the baseball cap cleared his throat and stepped away. The teenager tucked his phone into his pocket. One by one, the crowd lost interest now that the child refused to become their entertainment. Clara crouched slightly beside Annie. Are you all right, sweetheart? Annie nodded, though she did not look all right. I wasn't trying to make trouble. Ethan's anger drained as quickly as it had come. What remained was shame. He had frightened the child. I know, he said quieter now. Annie looked at him again. You don't have to be mad. I just missed him for a second. I shouldn't have spoken to you that way, Ethan said. Annie looked down at her shoes. It's okay. No, he said, it isn't. She reached for her locket, perhaps to comfort herself, but the chain caught on the strap of her backpack. The clasp slipped loose. The small silver locket fell, hit the pavement and skidded near Ethan's polished shoe. Annie gasped and bent quickly, but Ethan reached it first. He picked it up. It was old, scratched at the edges, warm from the sun, not expensive, not the kind of jewelry that belonged in the display windows near the luxury hotels he owned. Yet Annie watched it as if he were holding her whole heart in his hand. Please, she said, that was my daddy's. Ethan looked at the locket. There were faint letters engraved on the back, worn nearly smooth. He placed it carefully in her open palm. I'm sorry. Annie closed her fingers around it. Mommy says, I have to keep it safe. Then you should. She nodded and worked the chain back around her neck with small, careful hands. Clara helped fasten the clasp. Thank you, Annie said. Ethan wanted to ask where her mother was. He wanted to ask who her father had been, but he had already scared her once. And for once, Ethan Widmore chose not to push. Annie glanced toward the ice cream cart across the path. I have to go back. I promised I wouldn't move. Ethan almost smiled at that, but it didn't reach his face. Then you should keep your promise. She took a few steps, then paused and turned back. I'm sorry I said you looked like him. Don't be. He was nice, Annie said. So I thought maybe you were too. Then she ran into the crowd. Ethan remained where he was, surrounded by bright colors, cheerful music, and a park full of families. Clara stood beside him without speaking. Ethan did not move until Clara touched his arm. Mr. Widmore, she said quietly. The project team is waiting. He looked at her as if he had forgotten why they were there. By Clara, two executives from the resort division stood near a storefront, pretending not to watch him. One of them held rolled site plans under his arm. The other kept checking his phone, uncertain whether to approach a billionaire who had just shouted at strangers in the middle of Disneyland. Ethan straightened his jacket. Cancel the walk-through. Clara did not ask why. All of it. We have representatives from the Anaheim office, the hospitality group, and the design firm already on site. Send them an apology. Tell them something urgent came up. Clara studied him for half a second. She had been with him long enough to know the difference between business urgency and personal shock. Should I have the car brought around? No. Ethan looked toward the crowd where Annie had disappeared. Not yet. He started walking, not in the direction of the project team, but toward the ice cream cart. Clara followed without comment. The cart line had shifted. Families came and went. Ethan scanned the faces, looking for the yellow dress, the small backpack, the locket. He did not see her. And you're looking for the child. Clara said, I'm making sure she found her mother. You could ask park security and say what? I scared a little girl. Caused a scene. And now I need to know where she went. Clara's face remained calm. That would be one way to phrase it. He gave her a look. She softened her voice. You apologized to her. I know what I did. They walked past a shop window filled with stuffed animals and glittering princess dresses. She said her father died. Clara said. Ethan kept walking. I heard. And the locket was his. I heard that, too. Do you want me to find them? He stopped. No, he said. Not here. Clara nodded. They stood near the edge of the walkway while the park moved around them. Ethan watched a family pose for a photo in front of a flower bed. You know, Clara said when she said you looked like her father, you looked like you had seen a ghost. Ethan's eyes cut to her. Careful, I am being careful. No, you're being familiar. I have earned familiar. He almost smiled. Almost. Clara Bennett had worked for him for 12 years. First as an executive assistant, then as the one person who could tell him the truth without getting fired. She had 2 grown sons, 1 bad knee, and a habit of calling foolishness by its name. Ethan trusted her more than he trusted most relatives, though he would never say that aloud. He looked back toward the crowd. There was something in her face. Because she was hurt. No. He paused because she was sure. Clara waited. Ethan shook his head, angry at himself. It doesn't matter. Children see what they want to see. Adults do, too. He turned from the walkway. We're done here. They made their way toward the private exit arranged for visiting executives. The project team waited near a shaded seating area. Mark Ellison, the regional development director, stepped forward with practiced concern. Mr. Widmore, is everything all right? No, Ethan said, but it has nothing to do with the project. Mark blinked. Would you like us to reschedule the site review? Send the documents to Clara. I'll read them tonight. The partnership timeline is tight. Anaheim wants feedback before Friday. Then I'll give feedback before Friday. That ended the conversation. Mark nodded, gathered the others with a small motion, and disappeared into the flow of park staff and consultants. In the black SUV waiting beyond the service entrance, Ethan removed his jacket but did not relax. The leather seat was cool. Clara sat beside him, tablet on her lap. Home, office. It's Saturday, then it'll be quiet. The driver pulled away for several minutes. Ethan said nothing. He watched palm trees slide past the window. Then hotels, then traffic thickening toward Los Angeles. His mind kept circling back to Annie's words. My daddy died. He only said you look like him. He was nice, so I thought maybe you were, too. If this moment touched your heart, please like the video. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this. Ethan looked down at his hands. He had held the locket for less than 10 seconds, but he still remembered its weight. Cheap silver scratched edges, a clasp that needed repair. It had meant nothing to him, and yet the child had watched him hold it as though it were the last solid piece of her father. The Widmore Tower looked colder at night. Glass walls reflected the city lights of Los Angeles, while the upper floors remained almost empty, except for security guards, cleaners, and the few executives foolish enough to answer emails on a Saturday evening. Ethan stood alone in his office with the old photograph still resting on his desk. Daniel's smile irritated him, not because it was fake, because it had been real. Ethan loosened his tie and sat heavily in the leather chair. The city stretched beneath him in gold and white lines. Millions of people moving through lives he had spent years pretending were simpler than his own. Somewhere among them was a little girl with careful eyes and a silver locket. He reached for the photograph again. Daniel Whitmore at 13, Ethan at 11. Before lawyers, before boardrooms, before their mother started treating affection like weakness and loyalty like a transaction. A knock sounded lightly against the office door. Clara stepped in carrying a tablet and 2 coffees. You skipped lunch. I wasn't hungry. You never are when something gets under your skin. She placed the coffee beside him and remained standing. Ethan noticed she had removed her heels sometime during the drive back. That usually meant she expected a long night. You should go home, he said. So should you. Neither moved. Clara glanced at the photograph. I haven't seen that picture in years. Ethan leaned back slowly. Neither have I. Silence settled between them for a moment before Clara finally spoke. What were the letters on the back? She asked. Ethan's eyes lifted toward her. You noticed them, she continued. I saw your face change. He rubbed his thumb against the edge of the photograph. Clara said nothing at first. Then quietly, Daniel Whitmore. Ethan looked away toward the city again. Hearing his brother's name aloud after so many years felt strange, almost improper. Common initials, he muttered. Clara gave him a look. You don't believe that? No. His voice came out rougher than intended. I don't. She sat in the chair across from him. You think the child could be connected to your brother? I think a little girl walked up to me today wearing a locket with my brother's initials while telling me I looked like her dead father. He exhaled sharply. I think coincidence starts looking stupid after a while. Clara folded her hands. Do you want me to investigate? Ethan did not answer immediately. He remembered Annie's face when strangers started laughing at her. He remembered the way she defended him even after he snapped at her. He's not my daddy, he just looks like him. There had been no manipulation in her voice. No performance, just honesty. She looked healthy, Clara said carefully. Clothes were clean. Backpack wasn't new, but it was cared for. Her mother's probably working hard. You didn't even see the mother. I didn't need to. Clara shrugged slightly. Children tell you a lot about the adults raising them. Ethan stared at the skyline. Daniel hated this family before he left. He hated parts of it. He hated what it turned him into. Clara tilted her head slightly. And what did it turn him into? Ethan let out a tired breath. Someone who had to choose between love and loyalty. The answer surprised even him. For years, the Whitmore family had treated Daniel like a cautionary tale. He had fallen in love with a black woman from South Central Los Angeles. While working on one of the company's housing projects, their mother called her unsuitable. Their father called the relationship embarrassing. Victoria called it social suicide. Daniel called her Naomi. Ethan remembered the arguments. Doors slamming. Their mother crying in outrage over dinner. Their father threatening to cut Daniel off financially if he refused to come to his senses. Daniel had laughed at that. You think money makes you powerful, he told them once, but all it really does is show people what kind of soul you had before you got rich. Then he left. No goodbye party, no reconciliation, just gone. And Ethan had let him go. Not because he wanted to lose his brother, but because standing beside Daniel would have meant standing against the entire family empire Ethan had spent his life preparing to inherit. You were young, Clara said softly, as though she had heard the guilt in his silence. I was old enough. You were trying to survive your family, too. That's not an excuse. No, she admitted, but it might be the truth. Ethan stood and walked toward the window again. Below him, headlights crawled through downtown traffic like veins full of light. What if she really is his daughter? He asked quietly. Clara considered the question carefully before answering. Then somewhere along the line, your brother had a child he wanted protected from this family. The words landed heavily. Ethan thought of Annie clutching the locket against her chest. That was my daddy's. He closed his eyes briefly. Find them, he said at last. Clara nodded once. No surprise. She had known he would say it eventually. Quietly, he added. No investigators knocking on doors. No frightening anyone. Understood. And Clara, yes. If Daniel had a daughter. He stopped, jaw tightening. I need to know whether he died believing none of us cared. Clara's expression softened in a way she usually kept hidden at work. I don't think people carry old lockets around their necks unless they were loved. Ethan. After she left, Ethan remained by the window long after the office floor had gone silent. For years, he had convinced himself that Daniel disappeared because he wanted freedom more than family. But now another possibility had begun to grow in the dark corners of his mind. Maybe Daniel had not disappeared. Maybe he had simply built a smaller life far away from the Whitmore name. A life with a woman he loved and a little girl in a yellow dress. And maybe that life had fallen apart while Ethan remained inside towers of glass pretending success could replace blood. Naomi Parker did not realize someone was watching her until she reached the bus stop outside Disneyland. The afternoon crowd had thinned. Annie sat beside her on the bench, licking the last melted chocolate from the Mickey-shaped ice cream bar while Naomi checked the time on her cracked phone screen. Her back ached from walking all day. But Annie looked happy, and that made the sore feet and empty wallet worth it. You had fun? Naomi asked. Annie nodded immediately. Best birthday ever. Naomi smiled tiredly. Even after what happened, Annie's small shoulders lifted. People were weird. Not him. Naomi glanced toward the busy street. You scared me when you ran off. I know. Annie looked down. I just really thought he looked like Daddy. Naomi went quiet. 3 years had passed since Daniel died, but sometimes Annie would still say things that reopened the wound like it happened yesterday. Did he really? Naomi asked softly. Annie nodded again. Mostly his eyes. Naomi looked away before Annie could see her expression because she knew exactly what her daughter meant. Widmore eyes. The first time Naomi met Daniel's family, she noticed it immediately. The cold gray blue eyes, all of them carried like storm clouds over winter water. Daniel's were the only warm ones. Or maybe she had only wanted them to be. You mad at me? Annie asked quietly. Naomi pulled her daughter closer. No, baby, I'm not mad. I didn't mean to make trouble. I know. Annie rested her head against Naomi's arm. The man got mad because people laughed at me. Naomi's fingers paused against the child's hair. He yelled at them. Annie continued like really loud. That doesn't mean anything. I know. Annie touched the locket beneath her dress. But Daddy used to yell when people were mean, too. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Daniel had done that all the time. He could tolerate disrespect toward himself, but never towards someone weaker. It used to drive Ethan crazy. Ethan, even thinking the name made Naomi tense. She had not expected to ever see another Widmore again. Not after the funeral. Not after Victoria Widmore stood beside her husband's grave wearing black gloves and told Naomi with perfect calm. Daniel made his choice long ago. No flowers, no support, no offer of help for Annie, just judgment wrapped in expensive perfume. Naomi had walked away from that cemetery, promising herself she would never let her daughter near that family. And now fate had dropped Ethan Widmore directly into Annie's path. A black sedan rolled slowly past the bus stop before continuing down the street. Naomi barely noticed it, but inside the car, Clara Bennett watched carefully through the tinted window. That's them, the driver said quietly. Clara nodded once. Annie was leaning against her mother now, sleepy from the long day. Naomi looked exhausted in the way working women often did, shoulders carrying too much weight for too many years. Her jeans were faded, her sneakers worn at the edges, but Annie's hair was neatly braided, and her dress had been lovingly repaired by hand. Clara noticed details. She also noticed the protectiveness in Naomi's posture. Every few seconds, her eyes scanned the crowd before returning to Annie. She knows the world can turn cruel fast. Clara murmured. The driver glanced in the mirror. Should we stop? No. Clara looked back toward the bus stop as the car moved farther away. Ethan had asked for information, not intimidation. Sending security guards or investigators after a widow and her child would only confirm every ugly thing Daniel probably believed about the Witters before he died. Still, Clara understood why Ethan could not let this go. Back at the bus stop, Annie yawned. Tired a little, Naomi smiled faintly. You walked 10 miles today. Worth it. Naomi laughed under her breath. You sound like your father. I hope so. The answer hit harder than Annie realized. Naomi looked at her daughter's face carefully. The older Annie got, the more Daniel returned in small pieces. The stubborn chin, the quiet kindness, the way she noticed sadness in strangers before adults did, even the dangerous habit of trusting too quickly. The bus finally arrived with a hiss of brakes. Naomi guided Annie aboard and found seats near the back. Annie curled against the window almost immediately. Mommy, yeah, do you think the man was lonely? Naomi blinked. Why would you ask that? He looked lonely. Children saw too much sometimes. Naomi brushed a curl away from Annie's forehead. Maybe. Daddy used to look lonely, too, after Grandma and Grandpa stopped talking to him. Naomi's throat tightened. Daniel rarely spoke about his family after they left. But on difficult nights, usually when bills piled up or his heart medication made him tired, pieces would slip out. Ethan thinks money fixes everything. Mother only loves people she can control. They'll never forgive me for choosing you. Naomi used to tell him it did not matter. They had each other. They had Annie. They had enough. Most days she had believed it until the hospital bills came. Until Daniel's condition worsened. Until she watched him apologize for dying because he was leaving them with nothing but dead and love. You okay, Mommy? Naomi realized she had gone silent too long. I'm okay. You got sad eyes. Naomi forced a smile. That's because I'm raising a dramatic little girl. Annie giggled softly before drifting towards sleep against the bus window. Outside, Los Angeles slid by in fading sunlight. Fast food signs, gas stations, apartment buildings with cracked balconies, men unloading boxes behind grocery stores, ordinary people trying to survive another week. Far across the city, Ethan Widmore sat alone in his office staring at a photograph of the brother he failed. And for the first time since Daniel's death, Naomi felt something she had spent years trying to bury. Fear, not fear of Ethan himself. Fear of what would happen if the Witters discovered Annie truly belonged to them. Because rich families protected bloodlines differently than poor people did. Poor people fought to keep food on the table. Wealthy families fought to protect legacy, reputation, inheritance, and Annie, without knowing it, carried Whitmore blood in her veins, and Daniel Whitmore's last name hidden inside a silver locket around her neck. Ethan barely slept. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he was still sitting in the dark office with Daniel's photograph lying face up on the desk beside an untouched glass of bourbon. Los Angeles shimmered outside the windows, restless and awake. But the higher the city climbed, the lonelier it looked. By 6:30, Clara found him reading an old newspaper article on his tablet. Whitmore Development expands West Coast Holdings. The article included a photograph of the entire Whitmore family standing in front of a luxury hotel project 15 years earlier. Ethan recognized Father the face immediately. His father stiff with pride, Victoria elegant and cold, himself young and ambitious, and Daniel standing at the edge of the picture looking like he already wanted to leave. "You've been here all night," Clara said. Ethan locked the screen. "Did you find anything?" "Not much yet." She handed him a thin folder. No marriage license for Daniel Whitmore in California under his real name. No official death certificate connected to the family, but there was a hospital record from 3 years ago. Ethan looked up sharply. "Daniel Walker," Clara said. "That's the name he used. Walker, not Whitmore." The choice hurt more than Ethan expected. "He changed his last name," he muttered. "Looks that way." Ethan opened the folder slowly. Inside was a copy of a discharge summary from St. Mary's Medical Center in East Los Angeles. Congestive heart failure complications. Male, 38 years old, deceased. No family listed except emergency contact. Naomi Parker. Ethan stared at the page for a long time. 38. Daniel had died at 38 while Ethan attended charity galas and signed contracts worth more than entire neighborhoods. "When did he get sick?" Ethan asked quietly. "There are records going back almost 8 years. Looks like chronic heart issues." 8 years, Ethan repeated. 8 years. 8 years his brother had been in hospitals while the Whitters held Christmas dinners in rooms big enough to echo. Clara watched his face carefully. "You couldn't have known." "I could have looked." The honesty of the answer settled heavily between them. Ethan stood and walked toward the window again. "What about Naomi and the child?" "They live in Boyle Heights, small apartment building near Olympic Boulevard." Clara hesitated slightly. "Naomi works 2 jobs, day shifts at a pharmacy, evenings cleaning offices downtown. And the girl, Annie's enrolled at a local elementary school. Good attendance. Teachers describe her as quiet, polite, very bright." Ethan rubbed a hand across his jaw. "She's struggling financially," Clara continued. "Rent paid late twice this year. Utility notices. Nothing severe yet, but close." Ethan's chest tightened unexpectedly. Daniel's daughter. If Annie truly was Daniel's daughter, then his brother had died, leaving them alone and barely surviving. While Ethan lived in a penthouse worth $20 million, a sharp knock interrupted the silence. Before Clara could answer, the office door opened and Victoria Whitmore entered without waiting. She wore cream-colored silk and diamonds before 9 in the morning. Her posture remained perfect even at 68. People often describe Victoria as graceful. Ethan thought the more accurate word was controlled. "I called 3 times last night," she said. "You ignored me." Ethan's expression closed immediately. "I was working at midnight." Clara quietly gathered the folder from the desk. Victoria noticed. "Am I interrupting something?" "No," Ethan said flatly. Victoria studied him carefully. Mothers usually recognized exhaustion in their children. Victoria recognized weakness. "You look terrible," she said. "What happened at Disneyland?" Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "News travels fast. One of the board members called me. Apparently, you screamed at tourists. They were harassing a child." Victoria removed her gloves slowly. "A child who claimed you were her father." She didn't claim that, but the internet certainly enjoyed the story. Victoria sat gracefully across from his desk. "You should have had security handle it." Instead of creating a scene, Clara remained silent near the wall. Ethan crossed his arms. "Why are you here?" Victoria's gaze sharpened. "Because when my son suddenly loses control in public over a strange little girl, I become curious." The room cooled several degrees. Ethan said nothing. Victoria noticed the photograph on the desk. "Daniel." Her expression hardened almost invisibly. "Why is that out?" Ethan looked toward the photo but did not answer. Victoria followed his silence too quickly. "This is about him." Clara lowered her eyes slightly. Victoria stood. Ethan. Still silence. Then Victoria understood, and for the first time that morning, something uncertain flickered behind her calm expression. "What happened yesterday?" she asked quietly. Ethan's voice turned cold. "A little girl walked up to me and said I looked like her father." Victoria started at him. She was wearing an old silver locket. He continued initials on the back. D.W. Victoria's face lost color. Clara saw it immediately. Not grief. Recognition. "That's impossible," Victoria said too quickly. "Is it?" Victoria looked away first. "Daniel is dead. I know that. Then let the dead stay buried." The sentence hit Ethan harder than shouting would have. He stared at his mother. "Did you know where he was?" "No." "Did father?" "No." "Did either of you ever try to find him?" Victoria's jaw tightened. "Daniel made his choice. There it is," Ethan said softly. "That line again. It happens to be true. He died in East Los Angeles using another last name. Victoria's eyes flickered. Ethan noticed. You knew he changed it. He said, no, you reacted before I even told you. That proves nothing. But Ethan saw something cracking beneath her control now. Not guilt exactly. Fear. Clara saw it, too. Victoria picked up her gloves with measured movements. Whatever fantasy you're building in your head, stop now. A child approaches you in public, and suddenly you think Daniel secretly left behind a daughter. What if he did? Victoria's voice sharpened. Then that child has nothing to do with this family. The room went silent. Ethan stared at his mother for a long moment before speaking. That's exactly what you said about Naomi. Victoria's expression turned to stone. For years, no one in the Whitmore family spoke Naomi Parker's name aloud, and now it sat between them like a reopened wound. Victoria Whitmore left the office without another word, but the silence she left behind felt heavier than the argument itself. Ethan stood motionless near the window until the private elevator doors closed downstairs. Then he turned toward Clara. You saw that? Clara nodded carefully. Yes, she knew. I think she knew more than she wanted you to realize. Ethan laughed once under his breath. But there was no humor in it. My mother spent 20 years pretending Daniel vanished because he was selfish. Meanwhile, she knew exactly who Naomi Parker was. Clara remained quiet. The city moved outside the windows while old truths shifted inside the room. Ethan walked back to the desk and stared at the hospital record again. Daniel Walker, 38 years old, deceased. Walker, not Whitmore. He imagined his older brother standing in some government office filling out forms with a different last name because the old one had become poison. What if she kept them away on purpose? Ethan asked suddenly. Clara understood immediately who he meant. Victoria. She hated Naomi before she even met her. His jaw tightened. A black woman from Boyle Heights dating the Whitmore heir. Mother acted like Daniel brought home a criminal. Clara sat slowly. Families with money often confuse reputation with morality. That sounds polite. It's meant to. Ethan rubbed both hands over his face. Exhaustion was starting to settle into his bones now, but anger kept him upright. I want to meet them. Clara looked up carefully. Today? Yes, that could go badly. I know you're still a stranger to them, and if Naomi remembers your mother clearly, she probably doesn't trust the Whitmore name. Ethan leaned against the desk. Would you? Clara gave a small shrug. Honestly, probably not. The answer did not offend him because it was true. Daniel had died alone enough that his daughter wore repaired clothes to Disneyland while the Whitmore hosted charity dinners about helping disadvantaged communities. The hypocrisy tasted bitter. His phone buzzed against the desk. He glanced down. Victoria. He rejected the call immediately. 30 seconds later, another call came, this time from his father. Ethan stared at the screen before answering. Dad. Richard Whitmore's voice carried the same authority age had never softened. Your mother tells me you're digging around Daniel's past. Straight to the point. Always. I'm asking questions. Stop asking them. Ethan looked toward Clara briefly before walking farther from the desk. Why? Because nothing good comes from reopening old wounds. That sounds convenient. Richard sighed sharply. Your brother made his decisions. He died. Yes. And you never looked for him. Silence crackled across the line for a moment. Then Richard answered in the cold tone Ethan remembered from childhood boardroom dinners. Daniel walked away from this family willingly. He was your son. He embarrassed this family publicly. He threw away responsibility for a woman in a fantasy life. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Even now, even after death, still the same language. What if he had a child? Ethan asked quietly. Richard's silence lasted longer this time. Then came the answer. Then that child is not our concern. The sentence landed like ice water. Ethan stared out at the skyline, but saw only Annie standing in Disneyland, clutching her locket. He's not my daddy. He just looks like him. Jesus Christ. Ethan muttered. Watch your tone. No. Ethan's voice hardened. You watch yours. Clara looked up sharply across the room. She had never heard Ethan speak to his father that way. Richard's voice turned dangerous. Don't forget who built everything you have. And don't forget Daniel was your son before. He was your disappointment. The line went dead. Richard had hung up. Ethan lowered the phone slowly. For several seconds, neither he nor Clara spoke. Then Clara said quietly, that answered one question. Which one? Why Daniel never came back. The words settled heavily into the room because they were true. Ethan walked toward the liquor cabinet but stopped before pouring anything. He remembered Annie's face again. The way she defended him despite his temper. The way she apologized for reminding him of someone he lost. Like she thought grief was an inconvenience she caused other people. Children learned that kind of carefulness from struggling adults. What kind of father was Daniel? Ethan asked suddenly. Clara looked surprised by the question. I mean it, Ethan said. What kind of life did he actually build? Clara opened her tablet. From what I found, stable but modest. Naomi's employment records show the same address for almost 7 years. Annie's school attendance is excellent. No police reports. No state assistance beyond medical support during Daniel's illness, so they survived on their own. Yes, Ethan stared at the desk. He really loved her. I think he did. The realization hurt unexpectedly because Daniel had chosen love over wealth and apparently stayed loyal to that choice until the day he died. Meanwhile, Ethan had inherited the empire Daniel abandoned and somehow ended up more alone than his brother ever was. Clara's phone buzzed softly. She checked the screen. What is it? I had someone quietly pull the apartment building records. She hesitated. Naomi's behind on rent again. Ethan looked up immediately. 2 months, Clara continued. Landlord filed preliminary notices last week. The room went still. A memory rose before Ethan could stop it. Daniel at 17 standing in the kitchen after their father cancelled his credit cards as punishment for defending a janitor. Richard insulted. You think survival makes you important? Daniel told their father. But decent people survive every day without becoming cruel. At the time, Ethan thought Daniel was naive. Now he was no longer sure. What's the landlord's name? Ethan asked. Clara read from the screen. Martin Keene. Pay it. She blinked once quietly. Yes, and if Naomi refuses, Ethan considered that she probably will. Clara almost smiled faintly. Sounds like someone Daniel would love. That statement lingered longer than either expected. Ethan sat down slowly behind the desk again. No gifts, no pressure. Just buy them time. Clara nodded. Then after a pause, she asked, what happens if Annie really is your niece? Ethan looked toward Daniel's photograph. The answer came without hesitation. Then she's family. And for the first time since Daniel disappeared years ago, Ethan Whitmore said the word family without sounding like he meant ownership. Naomi discovered the rent had been paid on Tuesday morning. She stood inside the cramped leasing office while the old printer rattled beside the manager's desk. Martin Keene adjusted his glasses, confused himself. Well, he muttered, scrolling through the computer screen again. Looks like someone wired the full balance overnight. Naomi frowned. That's impossible. 2 months paid, plus late fees. There has to be a mistake. Martin turned the monitor slightly toward her. Apartment 3B, Naomi Parker. Unless there are 2 exhausted women in this building with the same problem. Naomi stared at the screen. Paid in full. No cinder listed. Her stomach tightened immediately. Who paid it? Martin shrugged. Anonymous transfer. Annie sat swinging her legs in the plastic chair beside the wall, coloring on the back of an old grocery receipt with a broken crayon she carried in her backpack. Does this mean we don't have to move? She asked hopefully. Naomi forced herself to stay calm. Looks like it. Annie grinned instantly, but Naomi's pulse had already begun climbing because poor people did not receive anonymous miracles, not without strings attached. Outside the building, the morning air already carried heat from the pavement. Naomi held Annie's hand tightly as they walked toward school. Mommy, yeah, you look worried. I'm thinking about money. Naomi glanced down at her daughter. Annie had learned to recognize financial fear too young. Maybe. Annie touched the locket beneath her shirt. Daddy used to get quiet when he worried, too. The comment hit softly, but stayed. Daniel used to fall silent when bills stacked up. He would sit at the tiny kitchen table late at night, pretending to read paperwork, while Naomi pretended not to notice him calculating numbers over and over. But even during the hardest years, he refused to call his family. I'd rather fail honestly than crawl back there, he once told her. At the time, Naomi thought pride was keeping him away. Now she wondered if pain had been stronger. At school drop-off, Annie hugged her tightly before running toward the entrance. Then, halfway across the sidewalk, Annie stopped and turned back. Mommy, yes, if the Disneyland man was lonely, maybe somebody should be nice to him. Naomi almost laughed despite herself. Baby, the man owns half of California. I think he'll survive. That doesn't mean he's not lonely. Children always finding the wound. Adults tried to hide. After Annie disappeared into the building, Naomi stood still for a moment too long. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. Her first instinct was debt collectors, but she answered anyway. Hello, Miss Parker. The woman's voice was calm and professional. Yes, my name is Clara Bennett. I work for Ethan Whitmore. Naomi stopped walking immediately. Traffic noise rushed around her. I'm sorry, Clara continued. But Mr. Whitmore wanted me to reach out regarding what happened at Disneyland. Naomi's expression hardened. My daughter already apologized. She doesn't owe anyone an apology. Then why are you calling? Clara chose her words carefully. Mr. Whitmore was concerned after realizing the crowd upset Annie. Naomi almost laughed coldly. Concerned enough to send assistance now. That isn't why I called. Then why? Brief pause. Your rent was paid anonymously this morning. Naomi's entire body stiffened. Yes. Anger arrived instantly, stronger because part of her had already suspected it. We didn't ask for charity. I understand that. No, I don't think you do. Naomi's voice sharpened. Rich people always think money fixes humiliation. Across the city, Clara sat quietly in her office, listening without interruption. Naomi continued before Clara could respond. Tell Mr. Whitmore whatever guilt he's feeling after yelling at a child does not buy access to my daughter. That wasn't his intention. How would you know? Because I've worked for him 12 years. Clara's voice stayed even, and I've never seen him lose control protecting a stranger before. The sentence caught Naomi off guard. She hated that it did. He scared her, Naomi said more quietly. Yes, Clara admitted, and he knows that. Naomi leaned against a bus stop pole, exhausted already, and it wasn't even 2. What does he want? Clara hesitated slightly. Answers. Naomi closed her eyes. There it was. The thing she feared. How much does he know? Not enough. That family should have stayed buried. Clara noticed the wording immediately. Not denied. Not confused. Buried. Miss Parker, she said carefully. Did Daniel Whitmore know his daughter wore that locket? Naomi's breath caught hard enough that Clara heard it through the phone. For several seconds, there was only city noise between them. Then Naomi answered quietly. You should not have said his name out loud. Clara leaned back slowly in her chair. Confess. Not suspicion anymore. Truth. Daniel was my friend, Clara said softly. Long before he left. Naomi swallowed hard. Then you know what they did to him. I know pieces. They destroyed him for loving me. No, Clara said gently. I think they tried. The correction broke something loose inside Naomi because tears burned suddenly behind her eyes and she hated herself for it. Daniel used to say the same thing. They can embarrass me. They can cut me off. They can pretend I'm dead, but they can't destroy me unless I become like them. Naomi steadied herself against the pole. Annie doesn't know anything about their money. She shouldn't. She thinks her father was just a mechanic who loved pancakes and old jazz music. Clara smiled faintly at that image. That sounds more honest than billionaire families usually are. Naomi gave a tired laugh before catching herself. Silence settled between them again. Finally, Clara spoke carefully. Ethan wants to meet you. No, he deserves to know. He had years to know. The words landed hard because they were true. Clara did not defend Ethan this time. Naomi wiped at her eyes angrily. Daniel died believing his family chose pride over him. I won't let Annie grow up feeling like some inheritance problem for people who abandoned her father. She isn't a problem. Maybe not to you, but to them, Clara asked quietly. Naomi looked down the busy street. People rushed past carrying coffee cups and lunch bags and ordinary worries. Nobody noticed the woman standing at the bus stop deciding whether reopening old wounds would destroy the small safe life she built for her daughter. Finally, she spoke. If Ethan Whitmore comes near Annie without my permission, I'll disappear so fast your investigators won't find us. Clara believed her, and somehow so would Ethan. Ethan listened to the recording twice. Not because Clara needed him to, because Naomi's voice stayed in his head after it ended. Daniel died believing his family chose pride over him. The sentence settled into the office like smoke. Clara sat across from him quietly while evening shadows stretched across the glass walls. She had not meant to record the call originally, but years working around legal departments trained habits into people. She sounded exhausted, Ethan said finally. She sounded protective. She threatened to disappear. She meant it. Ethan leaned back slowly. I know. He looked toward the city again, jaw tight. For years, Whitmore Development had bought land, moved people, reshaped neighborhoods. Ethan understood leverage better than most politicians. But this situation felt different. One wrong move and Naomi would vanish with Annie before he ever had the chance to explain himself. The problem was he did not fully understand what he was trying to explain. That he was sorry. Sorry for what exactly? For not searching for Daniel. For believing his family's version of events because it was easier. For building a life so consumed by money that his brother died 2 hours away while using another last name. Tell me about Naomi, Ethan said quietly. Clara looked mildly surprised. You mean personally? Yes, she thought for a moment. Daniel met her during the Jefferson Heights housing project. She worked at a community legal clinic helping tenants avoid eviction after developers started buying property nearby. Ethan gave a humorless laugh. That must have made family dinners interesting. She hated corporate greed. Daniel found that charming. He always liked arguments. No, Clara corrected gently. He liked honesty. Ethan accepted the correction without protest. Clara continued. Naomi was smart, hardworking, protective even back then. Your mother treated her like she was temporary, and Daniel. He looked at her like she was home. That answer stayed with Ethan longer than expected. Home, not power, not legacy, not wealth, just home. Meanwhile, the Whitmore estate in Bear sat mostly silent unless staff filled the rooms with artificial life. 3 kitchens, 2 libraries, 8 bedrooms no one used, a dining table large enough for 20 guests, and somehow never warm. Ethan suddenly hated the thought of going back there tonight. What happened after Daniel got sick? He asked. Clara's expression darkened slightly. From what I found, Naomi carried most of it herself. Hospital visits, bills, work. Annie was very young, and Daniel never contacted us. No. Why? Clara hesitated. Then, honestly, because he believed your parents would take Annie away. Ethan stared at her sharply. That's insane. Is it? The question cut deeper than she intended. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Because he remembered his mother discussing bloodlines at dinner like business mergers. Whiters do not dilute themselves emotionally. That was one of Victoria's favorite expressions. At the time, Ethan barely noticed how cruel it sounded. Now he heard it clearly. A soft knock interrupted the silence. One of Ethan's legal advisors stepped inside holding a folder. Sorry to interrupt. Your mother requested emergency revisions to the Whitmore Family Trust. Ethan frowned immediately. What revisions? The attorney hesitated. She wants language added regarding inheritance protections against unverified biological claims. The room went cold. Clara slowly lowered her eyes. Ethan stood up so abruptly the chair rolled backward. She's already moving assets. Mr. Whitmore, get out. The attorney left immediately. Ethan turned toward Clara. She believes Annie's real. She believes it enough to panic. Anger surged through him now, cleaner than guilt because anger gave him direction. She hasn't even met the child. She doesn't need to, Clara said quietly. People like Victoria Whitmore don't fear strangers. They fear blood they can't control. Ethan walked toward the window again, hands clenched. He suddenly saw the entire situation differently. This was not about money to Naomi, but it absolutely was to Victoria. If Annie truly was Daniel's daughter, then legally she carried Whitmore blood. That meant inheritance rights, family claims, public scandal if the story surfaced. And Victoria would destroy anyone before allowing weakness near the empire. Daniel knew, Ethan said suddenly. What? He knew exactly what Mother would do if she found out about Annie. Ethan exhaled sharply. That's why he stayed away. Clara said nothing because there was nothing false in it. Ethan thought back to the cemetery after Daniel's funeral. Victoria standing beside the grave untouched by grief speaking about reputation while Naomi held a child dressed in black at the time. Ethan told himself everyone mourned differently. Now he realized some people simply calculated differently. His phone buzzed again. Victoria. He ignored it. Then another message appeared. We need to discuss this immediately before mistakes are made. Ethan stared at the words mistakes. As if Annie was already becoming a legal problem. Instead of a little girl who liked Disneyland and believed lonely strangers deserved kindness, he looked toward Clara, set up a meeting with Naomi. She already refused. Not through assistance. Me. She may still say no. I know. Clara watched him carefully. Why does this matter so much to you? The question surprised him because the answer came too quickly. Because Daniel deserved better than what we gave him. The room fell quiet. Then Ethan added more softly. And maybe Annie does too. Across the city, Naomi sat at the kitchen table repairing the loose clasp on Annie's locket beneath the weak yellow light of their apartment. Annie had already fallen asleep on the couch beside old cartoons and half-finished birthday candy. Naomi worked carefully with trembling fingers. Daniel used to repair things around the apartment the same way. Patiently, quietly, like broken things deserve gentleness instead of frustration. She finally snapped the clasp closed and held the locket in her palm. Inside was the only photograph Annie had of her father. Daniel smiling beside a rusted pickup truck with one arm wrapped around Naomi while she laughed at something outside the frame. No wealth, no Whitmore empire, no polished lies, just love. Naomi closed the locket slowly. Then her phone buzzed with an unknown number. This time she already knew who it would be before answering. Naomi stared at the ringing phone for nearly 10 seconds before answering. Hello, Miss Parker. Ethan's voice sounded lower than she remembered from Disneyland. Quieter, too. The sharp edge was gone. Naomi stood from the kitchen table automatically and walked farther from the sleeping child on the couch. You shouldn't be calling me directly. You're right. The immediate agreement caught her off guard. I still did it, he added. Naomi crossed her arms tightly. What do you want, Mr. Whitmore? To talk. There's nothing to talk about. I think there is. Naomi looked toward Annie, sleeping beneath a faded blanket. The child had one hand tucked under her cheek while the repaired locket rested against her small chest. No, Naomi said quietly. There really isn't. Across the city, Ethan sat alone in the dark conference room beside his office. The lights of downtown Los Angeles reflected against the long polished table. He had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions with less tension than this phone call. I know who Annie's father was, he said finally. Naomi closed her eyes. There it was, the thing she had spent years avoiding. Then you know enough, she replied. I don't. You know the important part. Daniel loved her. That should have been enough for your family. The words landed harder because she said them without anger now. Just exhaustion. Ethan leaned forward slowly. Naomi, I didn't know. You didn't ask. He had no defense against that. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Naomi spoke again. Did your mother send you? No. She found out already, didn't she? Yes. Naomi gave a tired laugh under her breath. Of course, she did. She's wrong about Annie. She was wrong about me, too. Didn't stop her. Ethan rubbed a hand across his jaw. I'm not calling to fight with you. Then why are you calling? Because your daughter looked at me like I was still capable of being decent. He almost said it aloud. Instead, he answered honestly in another way. Because Daniel was my brother. Naomi's breathing caught softly through the phone. For years, no one from the Whitmore family had spoken about Daniel like he belonged to them. Not at the funeral, not afterward, not once. He missed you, Naomi said suddenly. Ethan froze. The confession came quietly, almost against her will. He talked about you more than anyone else. Naomi continued, especially near the end. Ethan looked down at the table. He said, "You used to follow him everywhere as kids," Naomi said. "Fishing trips, baseball games, school fights." A memory hit Ethan hard enough to make his chest ache. Daniel standing between him and 3 older boys outside school. "If you want him, you go through me first." Back then, Ethan believed older brothers could not lose. "He was angry with me," Ethan said quietly. "Yes," the honesty stung. "But he still loved you." That hurt worse. Naomi leaned against the kitchen counter, suddenly tired beyond words. "Daniel used to watch interviews about your company sometimes." Ethan frowned slightly. "Why?" "He wanted to make sure you were okay." The billionaire closed his eyes briefly. 3 years dead, and Daniel still sounded more loyal than the people who raised them. "I should have looked for him," Ethan admitted. "Yes," Naomi replied simply. No cruelty, no dramatic accusation, just truth. That somehow felt heavier. Annie shifted on the couch with a sleepy murmur. Naomi instinctively lowered her voice. "She doesn't know about your family," she said. "I understand. She only knows Daniel Walker, her dad, who fixed cars and burned pancakes every Sunday." Ethan almost smiled despite himself. Burned pancakes. Every time Annie ate them anyway because she thought it made him less sad. The image settled painfully in Ethan's chest. Daniel Whitmore, heir to billions, standing in a tiny apartment burning pancakes for his daughter. And somehow Ethan envied him. "You paid our rent," Naomi said after a moment. "Yes, you can't do that again." "All right, I mean it. I heard you." Naomi looked surprised by the lack of argument. Ethan continued carefully. "I wasn't trying to buy anything. I just didn't want Annie punished because adults failed each other." The sentence quieted her. For the first time since Disneyland, Ethan sounded less like a billionaire and more like Daniel's brother. Naomi sat slowly at the table again. "Your mother will come after her inheritance." Ethan's expression hardened instantly. "No, she won't." "You can't promise that." "Yes," he said calmly. "I can." The certainty in his voice made Naomi pause. "I know my mother," Ethan continued. "And I know exactly how she thinks. Annie isn't a child to her yet. She's a threat to control." Naomi's throat tightened because he understood too quickly. "She's 6 years old," Naomi whispered. "She still cries when cartoons get sad. She still leaves half her sandwich untouched because she thinks somebody else might be hungry later. I won't let your family turn her into some courtroom story." "They won't." "You sound very sure." Ethan stared out at the city lights. "Because they'll have to go through me first." The silence that followed felt different now. Not trust, but something slightly less hostile. Naomi looked toward Annie again. "She liked you." "That's unfortunate." A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Ethan heard it and unexpectedly felt tension leave his shoulders for the first time all day. She said, "You looked lonely." Naomi admitted that child notices too much. She gets that from Daniel. Another silence. Then Naomi asked softly, "Why did you really call tonight?" Ethan thought about lying. Instead, he told the truth. "Because I found myself wondering whether my brother died believing I stopped loving him." Naomi's eyes filled before she could stop it. "He never believed that," she whispered. Ethan looked down sharply. "He believed you were weak." Naomi continued honestly, not cruel. The words cut deeper than insults ever could because she spoke exactly the fear Ethan already carried himself. Weak enough to stay silent while his family destroyed his brother. Weak enough to let years pass without searching. Weak enough to confuse obedience with loyalty. Naomi wiped quickly beneath her eyes before speaking again. "Annie has school tomorrow," meaning the conversation needed to end before it became something dangerous. Ethan understood. "I'd like to meet her again," he said carefully. Naomi immediately tensed. "Not now," Ethan added quickly. "Not unless you want that, too." "And why would I?" "Because she deserves to know at least one Whitmore who regrets what happened." The honesty in that answer lingered long after the words ended. Naomi looked at the old photograph inside Annie's locket resting against the sleeping child's chest, Daniel smiling beside her beneath California sunlight. For years, she convinced herself the Whitmores had buried him emotionally long before he died. But tonight, for the first time, she heard grief in Ethan Whitmore's voice. Real grief. And that frightened her more than anger would have. 3 days passed before Ethan saw Annie again. Not by accident this time. Naomi agreed to meet only in public, and only because Annie would not stop asking questions about the lonely Disneyland man. Ethan suspected Daniel's daughter had inherited her father's persistence. The meeting place was a small park near Annie's school, far from cameras and luxury hotels. Children climbed over faded jungle gyms while exhausted parents watched from benches holding coffee cups and grocery bags. Ethan arrived early in dark jeans and a plain jacket instead of one of his usual tailored suits. Clara had suggested it. "You already intimidate people naturally," she told him that morning. "No need to dress like a bank." Now he sat alone on a bench feeling strangely nervous. At exactly 4 o'clock, Naomi appeared holding Annie's hand. Annie spotted him immediately. "There he is," she shouted before running across the grass. Naomi opened her mouth to stop her. But Annie had already launched herself toward Ethan with the full reckless trust only children possessed. Ethan stood automatically just in time to catch her small body colliding against him. "You came," Annie said brightly. Ethan looked down at her curls bouncing in the afternoon light and felt something shift painfully inside his chest. I said I would. Naomi approached more slowly. She wore pharmacy scrubs beneath a denim jacket. Dark circles visible beneath her eyes. She looked like someone carrying too many responsibilities on too little sleep. Hi, she said carefully. Hey. Awkward silence followed. Annie solved it immediately by grabbing Ethan's hand. Come see the ducks. Before either adult answered, she started pulling him toward the pond. Naomi sighed softly. She's decided you belong to her now. Ethan glanced toward Annie. Daniel used to do that. Naomi looked at him sharply. What? He collected people. Ethan almost smiled at the memory. Old neighbors, stray dogs, teachers. Everyone hated. He acted like lonely things personally offended him. Naomi laughed before she could stop herself. That sounds exactly right. The tension between them eased slightly after that. At the pond, Annie tossed pieces of cracker toward the water while Ethan stood beside her awkwardly, hands in his pockets. You really are tall, Annie informed him. Seriously, I've been told. And you still look like my daddy. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Annie, what he does? Ethan surprised himself by answering gently this time. Maybe a little. Annie grinned triumphantly like she had won an argument nobody else realized was happening. A duck flapped loudly near the edge of the water, startling her backward. Ethan's hand instinctively steadied her shoulder before she could stumble. The movement was quick, natural. Naomi noticed anyway, and suddenly she saw Daniel again so clearly it hurt. Some reflex, same protective instinct before thought even caught up. She looked away quickly. Annie continued feeding ducks while asking Ethan impossible questions with complete seriousness. Do rich people eat cereal? Yes, every day, sometimes. Do billionaires have homework? No. That sounds unfair. Ethan actually laughed. Then a real laugh. Rusty from disuse. Nearby, Naomi watched quietly. This was dangerous. Not because Ethan looked cruel. Because he didn't. That was the problem. She expected arrogance. Distance, maybe pity. Instead, she found a man looking at Annie like he was trying to understand how he missed years of her existence. Eventually, Annie wandered toward the playground after spotting another little girl on the swings. Naomi sat cautiously on the bench while Ethan remained standing for a moment before joining her. She likes you, Naomi admitted. She shouldn't decide that so fast. She got that from Daniel, too. They watched Annie climbing the jungle gym in determined silence. Finally, Ethan spoke. I brought something. Naomi stiffened immediately. I told you no money. It's not money. He reached carefully into his jacket and handed her a folded piece of paper. Naomi opened it slowly. A photograph, old and slightly faded. Daniel, at 16, sitting on the hood of a pickup truck beside a younger Ethan. Both boys were soaked from rain, grinning at the camera while holding fishing rods. Naomi stared at it silently. He kept one too, Ethan said quietly. Same day, her throat tightened. Daniel talked about that fishing trip constantly. She whispered. Ethan nodded faintly. We got stranded for 6 hours because he dropped the truck keys into a lake. Naomi laughed softly through sudden tears. That sounds like him. He blamed me for years. Did you do it? No. Ethan paused. I let him. That answer lingered. Naomi studied the photograph again. Two brothers before pride and money and family expectations poisoned everything. Annie should have this, Ethan said. Naomi looked up. Why? Because she deserves to know her father had people who loved him before things fell apart. The honesty in his voice unsettled her. Across the playground, Annie waved excitedly. Look at me. Both adults looked over immediately. Annie balanced carefully across the monkey bars with fierce concentration. Halfway across, she slipped slightly. Ethan stood before Naomi even reacted, but Annie recovered instantly. I'm okay, she yelled proudly. Ethan sat back down slower this time while Naomi watched him carefully. You really loved him, she said quietly. The statement seemed to surprise him. He was my brother. That's not always the same thing. Ethan looked toward the playground for a long moment before answering. When we were kids, Daniel used to leave the hallway light on for me. His voice lowered slightly. I was scared of thunderstorms until I was 12. Naomi blinked softly. He'd sit outside my room pretending he wasn't waiting there. Ethan looked down briefly. After he left, the house got very quiet. The sentence carried more loneliness than he intended. Naomi suddenly understood what Annie noticed at Disneyland. Not wealth, not power, absence. A cold wind moved through the park. Annie ran back toward them with flushed cheeks and grass stains on her sneakers. Can we get hot chocolate? She asked hopefully. Naomi opened her mouth automatically. Baby, we shouldn't spend money on I know a place nearby. Ethan interrupted carefully. And before you say no, I'm asking because I'd like company. Naomi hesitated. Annie grabbed her hand immediately. Please, Ethan waited without pressure. For the first time in years, Naomi saw Whitmore waiting for permission instead of assuming ownership. And somehow that changed everything a little. The cafe Ethan chose was small and warm, tucked between a laundromat and an old bookstore on a quiet corner near the park. Not the kind of place billionaires usually entered. Naomi noticed that immediately. So you do no places without valet parking? she said as they walked inside. Ethan glanced at her. I'm learning. Annie ran straight toward the display case. They have marshmallows. The elderly cashier smiled at her enthusiasm. Extra marshmallows for birthday girls. Annie gasped. How did you know it's my birthday? You're wearing a paper Disneyland crown, Naomi said gently. Annie touched the wrinkled birthday crown on her head and laughed. They settled into a booth near the window. Ethan ordered 3 hot chocolates and a grilled cheese sandwich after Annie admitted she was hungry but not super hungry. Naomi started to protest about the food. Ethan stopped her quietly. Please don't turn every kindness into a negotiation. The sentence was simple, but it carried no pity. Naomi looked away first. That's easy for rich people to say. No, Ethan replied calmly. It's easier for rich people to use money to avoid sincerity. There's a difference. That answer silenced her. Annie, meanwhile, had already covered her upper lip with chocolate foam and looked delighted about it. You have a mustache, Ethan told her. I know, Annie grinned wider. I'm keeping it. For a while, conversation stayed easy because Annie refused to let silence survive. She talked about school, cartoons, ducks, and the fact that one boy in class ate glue last month for no reason anybody understands. Ethan listened more than he spoke, but Naomi noticed something unsettling. He was good with her, not performative, not awkward, instinctive. Daniel used to listen the same way, like children deserved full attention instead of polite dismissal. The thought hurt halfway through the sandwiches. Annie looked up suddenly. Do you have kids? Naomi tensed immediately. Ethan answered without hesitation. No. Why not? Naomi sighed softly. Annie, what? It's normal. Ethan surprised them both by smiling faintly. I work too much. Then after a while, I think I forgot how not to. Annie considered this seriously. That sounds sad. It probably is. Naomi watched his expression carefully then. No defensiveness, no arrogance, just honesty. And somehow that made him more dangerous than she expected. The cafe television mounted near the counter suddenly shifted to a local business segment. Ethan's face appeared on screen beside the Whitmore Company logo. Annie nearly dropped her marshmallow. That's you. Several customers looked over at once. A man near the register frowned. Wait a second. That is him. Naomi felt tension return instantly. The waitress blinked twice while staring at Ethan. You're Ethan Whitmore. Ethan's posture changed automatically, walls returning before thought could stop them. Yes. The man near the register gave a low whistle. What's a billionaire doing in this neighborhood? Naomi hated the question immediately because she recognized the tone beneath it, not curiosity. Class judgment. Annie looked confused. What's wrong with this neighborhood? Nobody answered her. Ethan looked directly at the man instead, eating hot chocolate, apparently. A few people laughed softly, tension easing slightly. But Naomi noticed the waitress staring now at her and Annie differently, calculating, trying to understand the picture. That look again. Who belongs to who deserves what? Poor women learn to recognize that look early. The waitress forced a smile. Well, enjoy your evening. After she walked away, Annie leaned closer to Ethan. Do famous people always make restaurants weird? Ethan almost smiled. Pretty often. You should wear hats. That's solid advice. Naomi stared down into her cup. This is exactly why I didn't want Annie near your world. Ethan's expression softened slightly. My world did that long before Annie entered it. The honesty caught her again. Before she could answer, Ethan's phone buzzed sharply across the table. Victoria. He ignored it. Seconds later, another message appeared. Call me immediately. Lawyers are already asking questions. Naomi saw the screen before he turned it over. The warmth inside her disappeared instantly. There it is, she said quietly. Ethan looked up. Naomi, no, don't. She pushed the cup away. This was nice for 1 hour. I almost forgot who your family is. My mother doesn't control me. She controls the damage around her. Annie looked between them, confused by the sudden change. Ethan lowered his voice. Nobody is coming after Annie. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. How? Naomi shot back. You going to fight your entire family for a little black girl they already decided doesn't belong? The cafe fell quieter around them. Ethan held her gaze steadily. Yes. The answer came so fast Naomi could not tell if it was bravery or guilt. Maybe both. Annie touched Naomi's arm gently. Mommy. Naomi immediately softened her expression for the child. It's okay, baby. But it wasn't because Ethan Whitmore was beginning to sound sincere, and sincerity had the power to ruin carefully built defenses. Ethan looked toward Annie. Can I tell you something about your dad? Naomi hesitated, then slowly nodded. Ethan looked at Annie carefully. When your dad was 17, he punched a boy twice his size because the kid made fun of another student for wearing thrift store. Annie's eyes widened proudly. Daddy won. Eventually, Naomi laughed quietly despite herself. Daniel came home with a black eye that day. He told Dad he fell. What really happened? Annie asked. Ethan leaned back slightly. Your father said some people act rich long before they have money, usually by deciding someone else is beneath them. Annie thought seriously about that. Then she asked the question neither adult expected. Did your family think Mommy was beneath them? Silence. Naomi's chest tightened instantly. Children always finding the hidden wound. Ethan looked at Annie for a long moment before answering. Yes, he said quietly. And they were wrong. Naomi stared at him. No excuses. No polished corporate language, just truth. Annie nodded slowly like she had solved something complicated. Daddy thought that, too. The television continued playing muted business news in the background while outside the cafe window. Evening traffic rolled past beneath fading California sunlight. And for the first time since Daniel died, Naomi felt something dangerous beginning to form at the same table where her daughter laughed beside a Whitmore. Not trust yet, but the possibility of it. 2 nights later, Naomi found Ethan standing outside her apartment building at 7:30 in the evening holding a paper bag from the cafe Annie liked. He looked out of place beneath the flickering hallway light and cracked concrete stairwell. What are you doing here? Naomi asked immediately. Ethan lifted the bag slightly. Peace offering. You can't just appear at people's homes. I know. He glanced toward the upstairs windows. Annie said, you work late Thursdays. I wanted to bring dinner before she fell asleep. Naomi stared at him suspiciously. How does Annie know your phone number? Ethan looked briefly guilty. She asked Clara for it. Naomi pinched the bridge of her nose. Of course she did. Before Ethan could answer, the apartment door upstairs flew open. Mommy, Annie shouted from the railing. He brought sandwiches. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Children truly destroyed strategic planning. 5 minutes later, Ethan sat awkwardly at their tiny kitchen table while Annie happily unwrapped grilled cheese sandwiches like treasure. The apartment was small, old cabinets, scuffed floors, a humming refrigerator that sounded tired. But Ethan noticed something immediately. It felt alive. Drawings taped to the walls. Library books stacked beside the couch. Music notes scribbled onto grocery receipts. Annie's sneakers kicked beneath the table. Nothing matched. Everything mattered. Daniel had lived here. The realization hit Ethan harder than expected. Annie took a huge bite before speaking. Mommy says rich people don't usually visit apartments like this. Naomi nearly choked on her drink. That is not what I said. It was kind of what you said. Ethan hid a smile behind his coffee cup. Naomi pointed at her daughter. You inherited your father's ability to cause problems casually. Daddy said, honesty only becomes trouble when people are hiding things. The room went quiet for half a second. Then Ethan laughed softly under his breath. Yeah, that definitely sounds like Daniel. Annie beamed proudly. Outside, rain tapped lightly against the windows while old jazz music played quietly from Naomi's radio near the sink. Ethan recognized the song immediately. Daniel loved Miles Davis. Naomi looked surprised. You remember that? He played the same 3 records for an entire summer until I thought I'd lose my mind. He still played them here. Naomi glanced toward the radio, especially when he got sick. The warmth inside the kitchen shifted gently after that. Less guarded, more tired honesty. Annie eventually disappeared into the bedroom to search for a drawing she wanted Ethan to see. Leaving the adults briefly alone at the table, Naomi folded her arms carefully. You shouldn't get attached. Ethan looked at her steadily. Too late. That's not fair. No, he agreed quietly. None of this is. Rain thickened outside. Naomi studied him for a long moment. Why are you really doing this? I told you already. I don't think you did. Ethan leaned back slowly. My entire life, people around me protected the Whitmore name more carefully than they protected each other. Daniel was the only person in my family who thought that was insane. Naomi listened silently. He used to say, money turns small flaws into permanent habits. Ethan glanced around the apartment. I think he escaped before the rest of us noticed we were becoming strangers. Naomi's expression softened despite herself. He loved you, she said quietly. Ethan looked down at the table. I didn't earn that near the end. No, but he loved you anyway. That sentence stayed between them. Annie suddenly burst back into the kitchen holding a folded drawing. I found it. She shoved the paper toward Ethan proudly. 3 stick figures stood beneath an enormous yellow sun. 1 tall man, 1 woman with curly hair, 1 little girl holding both their hands above them. Annie had written carefully in crooked letters. Family is people who stay. Ethan stared at the drawing too long. Naomi noticed immediately. So did Annie. Do you like it? She asked more quietly now. Ethan swallowed once before answering. Yeah, I really do. Annie pointed at the tallest stick figure. That's you. Naomi opened her mouth instantly. Annie, what? Annie frowned. He's tall. Ethan surprised them both again by saying softly. Who's the woman? Annie looked confused by the question. Mommy and the little girl. That's me. Ethan nodded slowly like the answer mattered more than it should. A knock suddenly interrupted the moment. Hard, sharp. Naomi stiffened immediately. Nobody visited this late. Another knock came. Then a voice through the door. Miss Parker. Courier delivery. Naomi frowned cautiously and moved toward the door while Ethan stood automatically. She opened it halfway. A man in a gray suit handed over a thick envelope. Legal delivery confirmation required. The moment Naomi saw the return address, her face drained of color. Whitmore Family Legal Counsel. Ethan's expression hardened instantly. What is it? Naomi opened the envelope with trembling fingers while Annie watched from the kitchen doorway. Formal legal language. Inheritance review. Potential biological claim investigation. Requests for interviews and documentation. Naomi's hands shook harder with every line. I knew it, she whispered. I knew this would happen. Ethan took the papers from her quickly, eyes scanning faster and faster. Then something cold entered his expression Naomi had not seen before. Not billionaire charm, not regret, power. They filed this without telling me, he said quietly. Naomi laughed once without humor. Welcome back to your family. Annie looked frightened now. Mommy. Naomi immediately crouched beside her daughter. Hey, it's okay. But Ethan was already pulling out his phone. His voice when he spoke carried the same authority that built skyscrapers and destroyed boardrooms. Get me Victoria Whitmore, he said coldly. Right now. Naomi looked up at him. For the first time, she realized something important. Daniel may have walked away from the Whitmore empire, but Ethan knew exactly how to fight inside it. Sometimes the people society looks down on carry more love, dignity, and loyalty than the wealthy ever understand. This story reminds us that money cannot replace family, kindness, or truth. A child's pure heart exposed years of pride, silence, and injustice. Proving that real family is not built by status or power, but by the people who choose to stay, protect one another, and love without conditions. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration.